AI won't replace developers. Developers who use AI will replace who don't. Shortly, we're going to find out exactly how. I'm sitting down with Dan, a senior software engineer with more than 20 years of experience in software development. He has storied engineering career. He's also working on engineering platform at an AI company. So we are going to find out how he's leveraging AI in his development work. He's not on the camera, but we got something cool to represent him. So Dan, tell me, how did you first start using AI in development work?
This is always the bad. It was the good news and the bad news is for everyone. There is really like, so I've been programming for a very long time. I was very skeptical of all the AI coding tools, both certainly the agent stuff, but even the auto completion stuff. And I really had to work at it for a while in terms of knowing what worked, what didn't. I've learned a bunch of, which we can go through some of the flows that I use, which are very step by step with it. Where you were talking a little bit about kind of how you guide it is extremely important. For example, trivial example, but I'll be like, hey, go read these 4 files and come back and tell me what they're doing, right? And then I'll be like, okay, now we want to implement a change based on what you just read, right? So like priming it in those sorts of ways, like basically like how you would teach a junior engineer. But the number one thing is using the better models, the guiding. Have you experimented with using things like Windsurf or cursor rules files? Those are extremely important.
A little bit, but love to hear more about it.
Okay, so this is the other thing that will help a ton. And really almost, I couldn't probably work, I think a lot of people couldn't work without it. So in these sorts of, the cursor has one, there are other ones that have them.
And when to use cursor versus Windsurf?
Either of them are fine. They're the same category of things, right?
And what are the other available tools?
So you've got one category of stuff that I would say is like in this group, these are like IDEs with autocomplete plus agent mode. And these are Windsurf. They're all basically the same cursor. In theory, VS Code plus Copilot, which is kind of like meh. And like these are the main ones, right? So these are the ones that I use the most, just because I'm like I'm just used to this kind of flow. The other ones are like kind of like just straight plugins, right? So you've got things like I think Zencoder works as a plugin. It's not an IDE, if I remember. There's a thing called Continue. There's a few others like this. And then the other ones, which you might have better experiences with, and a lot of people seem to like, are these like, it's called like terminal-based flow. And these are ones like the one OpenAI just came out with, but like Claude Code is this, CodeBuff is this, which you all might, I would check that out. You might like senior engineers often very much like Aider. And then what's the other one? I mean, I guess like the new OpenAI Codex is like this, and there's a few others. I generally like these, but I know a lot of people, especially more senior engineers often, who like working with, for example, CodeBuff and Aider. And these are tools where you're basically you're in the command line, terminal on the command line, and you're like, go implement such and such, and it kind of goes off and tries. Plug and play models can often be a little cheaper than these as well. But these, I think, are worth trying. You might find them really good. You can give them like a product feature and like see how they go. Like I think those are pretty useful. My advice on this is try a bunch. And unfortunately, my other advice is try a bunch and don't give up, I guess, in the first hour, right? Like you really have to stick with them. I did my own experience on this literally was, I mean, I could find you rants from a year ago where I was like, all these tools, bullshit, these things that I'm gonna do anything, I'm smarter than all of them, which I probably am. But, after a while, you get actually better at them as with anything as a programmer, right? So I guess my advice on this is try, like my general advice on this is to try to keep an open mind on it and find the areas where it works and it doesn't. So for example, for me, I'm not really a front-end engineer, right? We have a very good front-end code base where if I go to I like Cursor and I'm like, take a look at these examples explicitly, right? Like here's how we do such and such components, right? Based on precisely what these components are. You have to be very explicit here. go add a table or something to this, right? And that I find really helpful, right? Because it uses our design system. It knows like we use Radix, so it uses Radix, right? Like if you just give it an arbitrary like thing, and sometimes it's good at picking up the context, but often it's not, right? But if you are explicit with the context, and like, you know, like Cursor is pretty good at this.
Can we see some examples?
I'll show you some stuff like in my own stuff here, literally like something I'm working on right now. So like we're adding this like AWS, it's like a table interface, right? And you know, so it's like we have these existing artifacts, right? Where I can be like, hey, go look at these artifacts here, and based on that, derive some stuff. I'm going to review the code, obviously, but like we have enough in our current design, and I'm not a front end engineer. We have enough in our current design patterns where it's able to like fairly intelligently figure this out. But you'll also notice like I'm using the O3 Max model here, right, which is like hella expensive. And you know, if I drop down to 440, or even, you know, it's not as good. Like you could switch around. So like Cursor has this is new auto model where it actually is pretty smart, where if given the nature of the task you give it, it will try to optimize for what you're asking for, which is actually pretty helpful. I don't use it, but like I know like a lot of people do, and it helps in the sense where it will pick the optimal model for the kind of question you ask. So for example, if you ask a question like, hey, I need to like, I don't know, I need to do like a really large refactor, like Gemini is better for that because it's got a larger context window. If it's just like, hey, I need to implement this function, 4.1 might actually be fine because it's simple. So you can try that auto model. But I guess, yeah, I guess it's a long answer, but I guess my takeaway is, you know, you have to treat this very like its own form of programming, really, which I know sucks. But you know, I think if you kind of go and really try to adopt it, it can help that.
Can you tell more about rule files you mentioned?
Let me get into that. So actually, I can show you an example. So the idea of a rules file is you specify the way it actually technically works. So the way it actually specifically works is what it does is it dumps the rules file into the system prompt that it sends over to the LLM. And what you can dump here, so these are Windsurf rules, but it's the same thing. You specify. So this is actually what we use for. So we have a docs repo, uses Starlight. It's consistent context, and what it does then is after you do this, it takes this into account for whatever it does, right? So like this is what we send to Claude, which is super. So one of the things that can very often help. So there's a bunch of things you can do here. So one of the things that we do all the time in this is like how simple stuff like how to run tests, right? So for example, when you tell it that, it will run tests the way you specify. Otherwise, it forgets to whether it should use MPX or whatever, right? You can also tell it, for example, always run tests after making this change, or you know, so you can really guide it, and it uses that a lot. So having those, and not only that, but you can make it very specific. You could be like, our components live in this directory, right? So when it goes to try to fetch context, it goes there, right? So most of the game, and it really is like it's like a game, is helping the LLM get the right context. Like that's literally 90% of this, right? Because if a good enough LLM given enough context will generally be able to figure it out. Without context, that's when it gets completely lost, right? The other thing, and this is very subtle, is LLMs, especially some of the older models like 4.1 and 4.0, O3 is much better at this because of the way they tuned it. They are very, very fine-tuned to be nice to you and to agree with you, right? So for example, if you go like for example, I think maybe we should do X. It'll be like, yes, brilliant idea. Let's do X, right? They're like glazing constantly. And so you have to like be very careful, unfortunately, in like how you do it. Like what I usually write is stuff like, hey, like here's an idea. I'm probably wrong. Like you basically need to like disparage yourself. What do you think? Right. And then it'll be like, otherwise it's gonna, and it often will just make shit up to make you happy. right? So for example, like, hey, the tests are passing. I've seen this happen all the time. It's like our tests are failing. It'll be like, cool, and then it just ignores the test, right? It's like, hey, now they're passing. Congratulations. Blah blah blah. Right. I'm frequently insulting the models as we go. Like I'm just yelling at it. I'm like, shut the fuck up type shit. And that helps. But in all seriousness, like you have like so much of it is and again, it's frustrating and we'll see how they get better over time. Is like how you like the little bits of language actually matter here, unfortunately, right? And it's like, hey, this React component looks maybe wrong. Take a look. Like it's like you have to be like really careful with it. And I know that's annoying. There are benefits to it, but again, like so much of it is in the very specific details of how you write for it. Like if I look, I know I could pull up like a previous conversation. I actually let me like this will probably be useful. Let me pull up something from like a pretty useful one of something I did recently. So this was half debugging, half like full on like let's try to implement this together. Right now, this is this was for a particularly difficult where I was trying to like think through like how we would do this, and so like I was looking through. So here's like an example where I was trying to. This is again with the agent. I was trying to walk through how we would implement this is in our own. I know this is very meta in our own product, which has an agent. I was trying to walk through like how we would try to send down these new, like we call them like artifacts, right? So in the same way, if you've used Claude or something like that, we have this graph artifact, right? And so I was trying to think about what was the best way to do it. But like here was an error. I literally just dumped the error here, and I said, "Here's this." It spent some time thinking. It tried to find it. It correctly realized that the import name was wrong, which is great, right? It fixed it. Now it worked. Um, then we had some mock data, which I was looking at, and I asked, "Is this real data?" And it looks at the code and it says, "No, this is this is not real data." And right, and then and then like I came down here and I said, "Okay, well." So now I look through and I'm like, you know, it's hard for you to say, but this is I dumped. If you see lines 910 to 960, this is like just code that I copied, right? Or output. I said, okay, let's start there, and I'm dumping. So I'm just dumping a bunch of errors, right? So this is where I spend most of my time, which is debugging stuff. I find it very helpful for debugging, right? So I'm just like debugging, and it figures out, okay. Then I go, this is another thing. Check the permissions, right? So we have docs. I'm linking in Cursor. You can link out. I'm linking all the time to docs. So it goes and it reads docs that I send it, right? And it recommends, hey, you might need to change this bucket. This is very, very helpful. And I wasn't sure. I was like, okay, let's change something else. And so I dumped here another error, which is this. It goes through, it parses here, finds these things, comes to the conclusion. And then again, I'm asking questions like, why shouldn't we just, so this is just helping me debug myself, right? And here it compliments me. Thanks. That's a very sharp question. I really appreciate that. Again, like as I'm doing this, it hasn't written any code or fixed anything. It makes a suggestion here. And I'm still just saying, let's go through, blah, 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 blah. Now I'm literally asking questions about the code. I'm like, and this actually helped me break through. What I realized was that we were overusing, see here, the infra scan, I only want to do this. So blah, 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 blah. And then it said, use this. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So this maybe was 10 minutes of debugging, but I figured out that what we needed to do was, among other things, adjust our prompt, but also like change the codes.
Does it make you less effective as a coder, or could you have done faster without it?
This would have taken me 2 hours of print debugging, basically. Like this is just this is straight debugging, right? And if you read like the way I'm doing this is basically what I would do, how I would debug, like rubber duck debugging, where you have like the little rubber duck next to you. That's all this is, right? Where I'm just literally talking to the rubber duck. And the cool thing is, unlike the rubber duck, this actually has access to my code. And, I find that useful. So again, this is that kind of process. That's a debugging session, right? I used to do that just in ChatGPT, honestly, all the time, where I would just dump shit and be like, what's wrong with this? The amount of code it wrote there is fairly minimal. But by the end of, let's say, 10 or 20 minutes of going back and forth, maybe 10 minutes, I was like, oh, I see what the problem is. We're using the wrong. It was basically using the wrong function. In order for me to have done that without AI, I literally would have been I would have been print debugging here. You're like here, we're here, like that, and it skipped me that. So I saved probably 2 hours of code, right, in a debugging thing. It didn't write that much code. I still wrote code, but it debugged this shit for me much easier. So those kind of flows I think are very, very useful. And that's probably how I spend most of my time in the editor. And because as you guys know, most of programming is debugging, that's where I find it very, very helpful.
Personally, what I have observed is models mostly rely on outdated packages or documentations. Is there any solution or way around to this problem?
It is, and I mean, I didn't come up with it, but here is the solution. So there is this thing called Context 7, which you can connect directly into your editor. And it has literally the most up-to-date documentation for every single library you possibly want. Because this is a lifesaver. Because what you identified is correctly a huge problem, which is the LLMs are, they're a year out of date, right? And things are moving so quickly. Like, if you want to have up-to-date stuff, you need to pull this in again. It's like everything is context, right? So here is Solidity, and you pull this in, and it has the full documentation of everything here. And you can do this in a couple of ways. The main way people do this is here's this repo called Context 7. You can set up what's called an MCP server, which you probably have seen, gets a lot of attention nowadays. And basically, you just add that to your cursor. And then when you're using it, you can just say like use Context 7. Half the time it'll figure it out automatically. The idea is that this is precisely the solution to your problem right here. So this is more people need to know about that. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is because like what I was doing before was I was literally dumping. I would literally be like, here's a link to the docs. Go read the docs. Pain in the ass. Like, and some repos have shit like we have this, like you may have seen this LLMs -txt, LLMs full.txt. Like a lot of doc sites have this nowadays, where like you can't. People will expose their docs, so worst case you could just like add the link, but using Context 7 is even better. Yeah, that's my main recommendation.
Just curious, is there any guide or template for rules files?
Yep. So there's a repo. I think it's still mostly up to date, but there may be it's a little out of date, but there's probably newer ones. So I'll link you here. There's this thing on GitHub called Awesome Cursor Rules, well named, has a ton of cursor rules specific for all sorts of different projects, like Next. Like there's a million. Like if you have Next with TypeScript, this is pretty good, I think. Like here's like stuff about, I mean, this is pretty simple, but like I guess even this has been useful. There is another thing that if you check this out, it's from this guy. So Devin is this thing, it's like an autonomous dev tool. It kind of works, but the reason I would go through this is just to see some of how he writes his cursor rules. It can give you some ideas of kind of how to do some of this stuff. I find that's pretty useful. There's a couple of other cursor rules. Yep, like it's a little like cursor rules for positive. Like there's a few other ones out there, but those are the ones I've seen. There's this one that I think is actually kind of shitty called cursor.directory. I would not use that one. But those are some of the ones I've seen. But generally, I mean, one thing you can do is actually fairly useful is you can do this. You can literally go to cursor and be like, hey, base whole repo, and like write an appropriate cursor rules file for it. Like I've done that. You can kind of leverage the LLM for that.
And which model you will use for this?
Use Gemini for that. So like as a general, like, I mean, the main, I mean, each model is like a little different. The best models in the world right now are O3 and Gemini 2.5. Those models are really, 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 really good. I mean, you should look at, I mean, I think the LLMsys is like mostly accurate now. So this is probably, here, I'll show you. So like the data in LLMsys, so I don't know if you've seen this stuff, but like, it's not always perfect, but it's like fairly accurate to keep up to date with this stuff. Like if you want to look at like one place to keep up with this, so the chatbot arena here is
Mhm.
actually pretty useful. Like, let's see what it's got right now. Yeah, I mean, this is correct. Like Gemini, these are the. I mean, this is. I mean, you can. I think you can just. Yeah, if you just put it by coding. Yeah, I mean, these are definitely the like Gemini 2.5 is definitely the best. O3 is close. Grok, I don't have that much left with. The latest 4.0, I guess, is scoring pretty high, which is actually surprising, but I guess that's good. DeepSeek, yeah, this is pretty accurate to me. Where is Claude? This seems I don't know. This seems a little weird to me that Claude is this far down. I think 3.7 is probably higher up. But in any case, these two models in Cursor and Windsurf, Gemini 2.5 and O3, for the hardest problems, are the best. The other huge advantage to Gemini is it can handle up to 1 million tokens. It's not accurate to 1 million tokens, but if you're giving a large amount of context, it tends to do a lot better than some of the other ones. So, and if you play around with these tools in Cursor and Windsurf, you'll see they think a little differently. Some take more time, but yeah, that's my general sense.
And what advice would you give the devs starting with AI?
My main thing is like you got like try to stick with it. I know like it's very easy. I was the biggest skeptic, but it works. Like you gotta get it. It's a thing where you gotta give it time, but like it works.
Thank you very much, Dan, for your time. It was really insightful session.